Welcome to this video on firewall architectures. On the CISSP exam, you may see a question or two about how firewalls are deployed and where they are deployed within the system, specifically how they are used. Now remember that firewall are just the software that's going to prevent unauthorized communication between different networks. It's how we filter and control the traffic. Now, within a firewall, when we deploy it, certainly when we deploy it at a network level, we can deploy what's called multi-home firewall. What we are talking about with multi-home firewall is that there is an outside interface and there is an inside interface. This outside interface is the external interface. This is the interface in which you cannot trust anything past this point. Nothing is to be trusted past this point of that external interface because that firewall creates that security boundary, right? So once everything's left the boundary, we can no longer guarantee any assurance that the traffic is secure, that is safe, other than control we have applied on them when we have sent it out of the firewall. On the inside interface, this is the internal interface. Sometimes this is called the trusted interface as well. Although there's an argument to be had about what you trust and what you don't, right? But really, it is called trusted interface because it's internal and we control everything all inside behind the security boundary. So the idea behind multi-homed is that there is just an external and internal interface. Another way we can deploy multi-home firewall is by connecting multiple network, and now at this point we have one external interface and two internal interface, right? So one external or outside or untrusted, and then we have two inside, internal or trusted interface. Okay, so on the exam, the way that you would probably see the question would be more along the line of trusted and untrusted traffic. But internal and external are how most vendors refer to the interfaces. Same with the inside and outside. Okay. So I wanted to cover all of those terms here. Another architecture deployment, you need to be familiar with this Bastion host. This is a firewall server that's going to be logically placed between an internal and external network. So architecturally speaking, it is placed between internal side and the external side of network. It is a hardened server. So it only contains the necessary services, and that's designed to reduce the attack surface on that firewall. So Bastion host by design has a minimal attack surface. So we only have the necessary services and functionality running on it. Something like we only have identification and authentication. Maybe we have secure shell or SSH enabled. Maybe SNP enabled, NTP enabled, but we don't have FTP enabled. We don't have telnet enabled. We don't have all the other services that are not necessary for the Bastion host. Now, where you are going to see Bastion host deployed is oftentimes in the cloud-based environment. That's where we use them and see them the most. As you can see right here, the Bastion host is deployed in this public cloud where you have the private cloud, which is all of our compute space on the backend. Then when someone comes in from the gateway, they have to identify and authenticate with the Bastion host. Then the Bastion host will prevent the entrance into that private cloud through the network. Okay, so again, it is stripped down server. That's the way I like to think of it. We pull all the services off, all the functionality, all the accounts, everything. We only have that absolutely necessary on that particular host. The next architecture you need to know is the screened host. What the screened host does is place it logically inside the security boundary behind the firewall. Okay, so we are connecting it to the internal interface, right? So it's behind the firewall in the security boundary. The screened host act like kind of proxy. But really what we are doing is we are screening all the traffic before we allow it to go into the network code. Now there's a couple of different ways you can do this. we can screen certain type of traffic and then allow it to go to the screened host. We can analyze the traffic. If the traffic meets our security policy, then we allow it into the network and onto its destination. Where you see the connection here. Maybe we are not screening outbound communication, right? So we allow that to go over another interface. Whereas inbound traffic or northbound traffic is all being inspected at the screened host before it allowed in the network, okay? Because all of our southbound traffic is trusted, right? All of our outbound traffic is what we are generating. So we trust it at a certain level. So maybe we don't screen it. So this is also called screened host architecture, and you might also see it called single tier configuration as well. Now, along the lines of screened host, we can also deploy what's called screened subnet, where we have two firewalls in row. So instead of putting the screened host behind the boundary, we put it into its own area. It's called demilitarized zone. So now when the traffic comes in, it will have to meet the firewall policy in order to get into this DMZ. Then the traffic enters the DMZ. It will be analyzed by the screened host. If it meets the policy, it will be forwarded to the next firewall, where it again has to meet another policy. Then it will be allowed to continue into the trusted local area network or whatever the traffic is destined. So again, these two firewalls create traditional demilitarized zone. You need a firewall on external side and also on the internal side with a semi-trusted or untrusted network in between. The DMZ, I like to think of a semi-trusted because it is something we control, because we have the external firewall that is protecting us. So the DMZ is semi-trusted. This is where you put your web server, file server, things like that. And this is another opportunity to screen traffic before we allow it to get into this internal firewall and before we allow it to go on to wherever the destination is. Okay, screen subnet and DMZ. And just to give you an overall idea of some other ways we can use firewall. Oftentimes firewall are paired. That's for redundancy purpose, high availability and so on. Same with the routers and switches. And that's why you see two of them here. So what we could do is here again we have DMZ, right? This would be your DMZ here, and then of the DMZ maybe we are hanging off this case zone. This is for our contractors, our visitors. This will get you access to the internet, right? So the internet would be out here. That way everything is contained within the DMZ. Nothing is getting to this internal firewall here, and certainly nothing's getting to the back end where we have our corporate local area network. Okay, now maybe on the back end of the second firewall on the trusted side of the network, right? So this is your internal interface. Maybe that's where our development environment is. And you might ask, why do we put our development environment there? Well, development's kind of loose, right? So there's a lot of security implications. There's a lot of risk behind taking the development. So we want to protect it as much as possible. We want to block any outbound traffic from development, meaning development will be able to come into the corporate network and access a certain resources. But we will not let it go into the DMZ or out of the internet to access anything. Okay, so this just give you a fewer definition ideas of how we would deploy firewalls within our overall system architecture. So the bottom line is here is just to understand different firewall architecture we talk about here, and certainly understand the screen subnet and Bastion host. Those are probably the most important for the exam.